As Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, he gazed upon the Great Pyramids in awe. These wonders of the ancient world overlooked the Egyptian sands for countless generations. The great pharaohs laid to rest inside them witnessed the Roman arrival, the conquest of Alexander the Great, the decline at the end of the Bronze Age, and the rise and fall of numerous ruling dynasties. As the sands of time kept falling steadily and the world around slowly deteriorated, the pyramids stood firm, ever present on the banks of the Nile. The secrets contained within them would stay hidden for thousands of years. However, our story begins even before the great pyramid builders, in a time of chaos and eternal darkness. In the beginning, there was only a vast primordial ocean. From these ancient waters arose Atum, the creator. Being all alone in the universe, Atum created Shu and Tefnut. The two siblings eventually got separated in the dark primordial waters. The father, fearing they were lost forever, sent one of his eyes to look for them. As the eye searched the darkness, it wept, but soon it found the children and returned them to Atum. Shu and Tefnut had two children of their own, Geb the earth and Nut the sky. From them came a set of 4 gods, Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys, thus completing the first Egyptian pantheon. Shu placed his son Geb beneath his feet and lifted up his daughter Nut. In this way, Shu created a space between earth and sky in which all creatures could live. The sun finally arose for the first time, expelling the primordial darkness. In this first sunrise, the creator Atum took the form of the sun god Ra. As the tears from the eye of Ra fell to the earth, the first humans came into being. Ra assumed the role of the first Egyptian pharaoh and ruled peacefully over all his creations. However, this state of bliss was not to last. As the sun god began to age, humanity started plotting against him. Angered by this, Ra sent his eye to smite them down. As the eye descended on Egypt, the guilty ones escaped into the desert, only to perish. Satisfied, Ra decided to end further bloodshed. Seeing this growing discord, Ra grew weary and decided to retire to sail his sun boat across the sky, leaving Osiris in charge of humanity. Osiris ruled alongside his sister wife Isis. Consumed by jealousy, their brother Seth killed Osiris and split his body into several pieces, scattering them across Egypt. Seth took the throne, and Isis traveled the lands looking for the pieces of her dead husband. When she collected all the scattered parts, Isis brought them together and breathed life into them. This revival was only temporary, and in their short time together, they conceived a child, Horus. Although Seth tried to poison the child on several occasions, he eventually grew to challenge the usurper. As the two deities fought, they disturbed the entire cosmos, and a divine tribunal was called to settle the matter. In the end, Seth was punished and had to join Ra in his sun boat, serving as his protector. Horus was crowned the king of unified Egypt, and his father, Osiris, the king of the underworld. In time, Horus would pass down his crown to humanity, leaving the dominion of man in the hands of the powerful god kings. Or at least, that's what the Egyptians believed. The lifeblood of ancient Egypt was the powerful Nile River. The steady white Nile flows for thousands of miles from the Great Lake Victoria until it joins with the Blue Nile near Khartoum. The two rivers then flow together until they split once more, forming a delta on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. The river brought water and with it life to the vast deserts of Egypt. The Blue Nile, originating in Ethiopia, was subject to seasonal monsoons, and it would flood the Nile each year. These annual floods regularly brought large amounts of mineral-rich silt, creating one of the most fertile lands in the world. This allowed Egyptians to grow an abundance of wheat, barley, and flax used for the production of linen. The lush lands around the Nile were surrounded by the harsh, arid deserts. To the west lay the vast dunes of the Sahara, and to the east rocky mountains rich in mineral deposits. These deserts provided great natural protection from outside invaders. Since the deserts were not suitable for life, all Egyptian towns were built along the Nile or within rare oases. The desert sands, unbothered by the annual floods, made a perfect resting spot for the dead. This cultural practice further distinguished the lands of the living around the Nile from those of the dead. The Nile served as an ancient highway, but a series of 6 cataracts, or shallow whitewater rapids, acted as roadblocks. The cataracts made traversal by boat impossible. The first cataract, located near Aswan, formed a natural border between Egypt and the Nubian kingdom to the south. To the northeast of Egypt stood the Sinai Peninsula, creating a land bridge to the Near East. This copper and turquoise-rich area served as an important corridor for transporting armies and resources into the Levant. Numerous commercial hubs sprang up along the Nile Delta, allowing merchants to ferry valuable goods such as gold and papyrus down the river and across the Mediterranean. Egypt was divided into two distinct regions. In the south, around the Nile Valley, stood Upper Egypt, while Lower Egypt was located around the Nile Delta in the north. Although these names might seem counterintuitive to us, the Nile flows from south to north, making Upper Egypt upstream from Lower Egypt. Historically, the pharaohs were seen as unifiers of the two lands. Egyptian history is divided into three main parts of unified rule when a single pharaoh ruled over both Upper and Lower Egypt. These periods are known as the Old Kingdom in the 3rd millennium, the Middle Kingdom in the late 3rd and early 2nd millennia, and the New Kingdom in the late 2nd millennium. The Old Kingdom is preceded by the Predynastic and Early Dynastic periods, when the Egyptian civilization first developed and eventually unified. Each of the three kingdom periods is followed by times of instability, known as the intermediate periods. The third intermediate period is followed by the late period, when Egypt was conquered by the Persians and thousands of years of self-rule came to an end. The late period concluded with the conquests of Alexander the Great, and it was followed by the Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt. Each of these periods was further divided into a series of ruling dynasties, allowing us to more easily recount the past and correctly determine the chronology of the events. These dynasties were first devised by an Egyptian priest, Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC. Instead of writing in his native Egyptian, he wrote his great work, the Aegyptiaca, in Greek for his Ptolemaic king. This ensured the work outlived the hieroglyphs, and although it is now lost to history, it was quoted by numerous ancient writers. Although his original division has some inaccuracies, the dynasties are still widely used today. Several king lists that name large numbers of pharaohs have survived, allowing Egyptologists to create fairly accurate relative chronologies. These methods were combined with others, such as radiocarbon dating and recorded astronomical observations, to create absolute chronologies. These joint efforts gave us reasonably accurate dates, although there are still plenty of ongoing debates, and most recorded years should be taken as an approximation. Forming a land bridge with Eurasia, Egypt was in the path of early hominids leaving Africa. The earliest evidence of hominid activity dates back as early as 700,000 BC. These were the early hunter-gatherer groups of Homo erectus, using primitive tools. These groups lived around the Nile for thousands of years until they were eventually replaced by modern humans, the Homo sapiens. However, their lifestyle would remain largely the same, consisting of hunting and gathering. The Sahara was not always a barren desert as it is today. North Africa passes through periods of high and low humidity based on cyclical weather patterns. The last African humid period began some 15,000 years ago, transforming the harsh deserts into extensive grasslands. This allowed the early humans to spread into the western desert. Around 6000 BC, this humid period ended, the desert sands returned, and life was forced back to the banks of the Nile. This green period allowed the early Proto-Egyptians to maintain large herds of domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats. Due to an abundance of animal protein, there was no need for labor-intensive farming, and Egypt lagged behind Mesopotamia and the Levant. However, as the climate shifted and grasslands receded, the Proto-Egyptians were forced to adapt quickly. Farming techniques first developed in the Fertile Crescent were introduced to Egypt, marking the beginning of the agricultural revolution in this part of the world. Wheat and barley, brought from the Near East, would from now on become staples of the Egyptian diet. By around 5400 BC, the first permanent settlements appeared in the Delta region. Meanwhile, the inhabitants of Upper Egypt were still primarily engaged in pastoralism. These nomadic people buried their dead in the deserts. The dry sands would dehydrate the bodies, creating a sort of natural mummy. This natural phenomenon likely gave rise to the later process of mummification that the Egyptians are famous for. The drying climate gradually pushed these nomadic groups closer to the Nile, and by 4000 BC, they too established permanent settlements and adopted agriculture. These developments occurred only north of the First Cataract, creating a cultural division between Egypt and Nubia. During this period, the Egyptians started relying on the annual floods of the Nile. The river would rise in July, flooding the nearby areas. When the waters receded in November, they left behind a layer of fertile silt. While the crops grew in these rich lands, they didn't require additional water. By late March, the crops ripened and were ready for harvest. This cyclical pattern led to the three-season calendar of ancient Egypt, consisting of inundation, emergence, and harvest seasons. Although the flooding of the Nile was reliable, the level of the flooding was not. Too low, and there would not be enough fertile land to feed everyone. Too high, and the waters would bring destruction to farms and villages. This uncertainty would follow ancient Egypt throughout its long history. Starting around 3800, the first traces of the Naqada culture appear in Upper Egypt. The culture is named after a large tomb site near Naqada, containing over 3,000 graves. Three significant sites emerged during this period: Naqada, the Golden City, Hierakonpolis, the city of Horus, and Abydos, the future resting spot of the First Dynasty. These early city kingdoms competed for the dominion of the region for centuries. Naqada burials show early signs of funerary practices later used by the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. The dead were wrapped in linen, laid on their side facing west, and surrounded by offerings. Over time, burial structures became more elaborate, eventually culminating with the construction of the Great Pyramids. The offerings of the dead started varying widely between individuals, showing a degree of social stratification. The richest grave sites were reserved for mighty hunters and warriors. Concurrently with Naqada, a distinct Mahdi culture developed in Lower Egypt. Archaeological excavations clearly show that they were lacking in wealth compared to their southern neighbors. The Mahdi were in contact with the Levant and the further Near East. They imported large quantities of copper to replace their stone tools, as well as some precious materials like lapis lazuli. The Mahdi traded these valuable goods with their neighbors to the south. The Naqada culture is divided into three distinct periods. Naqada I was only a regional culture, concentrated in Upper Egypt. The Naqada II period is characterized by expansion. Around 3500, Naqada began spreading both up and down the Nile. In the south they passed the first cataract, reaching the borders of Nubia. In the north they reached far into the Nile Delta, pushing back the Mahdi. The Naqada III period is associated with Dynasty 0 and the first unsuccessful attempts to unify Egypt. The late Predynastic period remains shrouded in mystery. Although the earliest evidence of hieroglyphs appear in some royal tombs, full writing had not yet been developed, and historians must rely on archaeological evidence to piece together the full picture of the early unification of Egypt. The presence of three distinct elite burial sites in Upper Egypt points to the existence of three separate city kingdoms. Those are the previously mentioned Naqada, Abydos, and Hierakonpolis. Naqada controlled the gold mines in the eastern desert, providing it with immense wealth. Abydos expanded all the way to the Nile Delta, controlling the trade routes with the Near East. And Hierakonpolis ruled over all the Nile Valley south of Thebes to the first cataract. This gave them access to the southern trade routes towards Nubia and beyond. The elite tombs show signs of a sudden decline in Naqada, coinciding with an increase in wealth of the northern Abydos. Historians believe Abydos took control of the lucrative desert trade routes and eventually conquered its smaller neighbor in the late 4th millennium. This left the two rival states, Abydos to the north and Hierakonpolis to the south, locked in centuries of fighting for supremacy of the Nile. Eventually, Abydos prevailed, taking control of the entire Upper Egypt. In the final phase of expansion, the kings of Upper Egypt conquered the rest of the Nile Delta, uniting all of Egypt into a single state. The king lists record Menes as the first pharaoh of unified Egypt and the founder of the First Dynasty. However, there is no early archaeological evidence of this name. Most Egyptologists believe he was either King Narmer of Abydos or his successor, Hor-Aha. Some evidence is found on the Narmer palette discovered in a destroyed temple in Hierakonpolis. This finely decorated cosmetic palette depicts King Narmer conquering the Nile Delta. On one side he is wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and on the other the red crown of Lower Egypt. Some historians believe it was made to commemorate the final conquest of the Delta and the unification of the two lands, while others are reluctant to read it literally. Whatever the case may be, around 3100 BCE, Egypt was united under a single pharaoh. He ruled an immense area, from the Mediterranean in the north to the first cataract in the south. This makes ancient Egypt the first recorded nation-state. The transformation from early village communities to full unification lasted only about 400 years, an exceptionally brief period. It's unclear how the Egyptians developed this shared identity so rapidly, while other early civilizations remained locked in a perpetual struggle between rivaling city-states. Some historians have suggested that the ease of traversal along the Nile allowed the rise of a strong central authority. At the pinnacle of this central authority was, of course, the pharaoh. The early pharaohs positioned themselves as god-kings responsible for preventing primordial chaos from overtaking the lands. They were seen as earthly incarnations of the god Horus himself, and upon their death they would join the Egyptian pantheon. From the early First Dynasty, the pharaohs combined the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt to create the double crown, the symbol of unified power throughout ancient Egyptian history. These crowns were made from organic materials, and none have ever been discovered. They are only attested to in hieroglyphic inscriptions and artworks. When the pharaohs were buried with all their worldly possessions, the double crown was not buried with them. This has led some historians to believe that only one double crown existed at any given time, being passed down from one pharaoh to the next. The ancestral seat of the early pharaohs was Abydos, located far from the Nile Delta in the heart of Upper Egypt. Hoping to keep a closer watch on the two lands, the pharaohs of the First Dynasty moved their palace to Memphis, a city situated at the mouth of the delta. From this new seat, they could more easily oversee the affairs in both Upper and Lower Egypt. Although the kings of the First Dynasty were still buried in Abydos, a number of large funerary complexes sprang up around Memphis in a region known as Saqqara. These served as the tombs of early Egyptian officials. To efficiently control such a vast territory, the Egyptian pharaohs relied on a widespread network of bureaucrats. Egypt was divided into 42 regions called nomes, each governed by a chief official known as the nomarch. This system allowed for a more methodical approach to governance from very early on. The primary duty of these regional officials was tax collection. The Egyptians quickly realized that the level of inundation of the Nile was a fairly accurate predictor of agricultural yields. Scholars would record the levels of the Nile each year and calculate the appropriate levels of taxation. The taxes in ancient Egypt were paid in the form of raw produce. These collected goods were then used by the central authority in various ways. Some goods were used directly to pay the bureaucrats and other state employees. Others were sent to state-run workshops to be transformed into valuable trade goods. The remainder was distributed among great warehouses scattered across Egypt. These goods would be used in times of crisis to avoid widespread famines and the accompanying uprisings. With an effective taxation system in place, came a sharp increase in state wealth. This wealth was used to construct the aforementioned graves around Memphis, as well as royal burial structures in Abydos. These new monuments dwarfed anything present in the Predynastic period. The deceased pharaohs were accompanied by exceedingly rich offerings and even human and animal sacrifices. This grim practice was abandoned by the end of the First Dynasty and never reappeared in ancient Egypt. Another major use of large-scale labor was the construction of canals along the Nile. These canals expanded the floodplains of the Nile, further increasing agricultural yields across the country. This extensive level of bureaucracy would not be possible without the use of writing. As previously mentioned, the earliest hieroglyphic signs appear in royal tombs of Abydos around 3250 BC. They were used to write the names of kings or label grave offerings. By the mid-First Dynasty, around 2900, the hieroglyphic inscriptions became more elaborate, containing multiple ideas within a single inscription. By the Second Dynasty, complete hieroglyphic sentences started appearing, with the first such inscription dated to the reign of King Peripsen around 2750. Hieroglyphic scripts consisted of ideograms, signs representing words or ideas, and phonograms, signs representing sounds. Simple words like bird, man, or king could be written using ideograms, while more complex words like pharaoh names had to be written using phonograms. Initially, upwards of 1,000 hieroglyphic signs appeared, but by the Middle Kingdom, this number had been reduced to around 750. This made hieroglyphs extremely difficult to learn, and writing was reserved for only a select few. The men who mastered this art held immense power over the populace. We owe our wealth of knowledge of ancient Egypt to hieroglyphs. The Egyptians would systematically decorate their structures with hieroglyphs carved right into the walls. These inscriptions held a plethora of information on all sorts of important events and people. Once they were deciphered in the 19th century, all this information, kept safe by the desert sands for several millennia, was finally unlocked. Although cuneiform writing appeared somewhat earlier in Mesopotamia, it's believed that hieroglyphs are an indigenous invention of ancient Egypt. Initially used to honor kings and gods, they were soon adopted by the complex bureaucracy and employed with great efficiency. Although one of the defining features of ancient Egypt, the hieroglyphs were not the only script used by the Egyptians. This script was devised for carving into stone, but when writing on papyrus, they used the modified cursive hieroglyphs. During the first intermediate period, around 2100 BC, hieratic diverged from the cursive hieroglyphs, creating a completely separate script. While hieratic was the primary script used for writing on papyrus, the cursive hieroglyphs remained in use for religious texts. During the late period, hieratic script evolved into the Demotic script in Lower Egypt. Demotic was eventually adopted by the rest of the Egyptian state, becoming the primary writing system in Egypt. These ancient Egyptian scripts were seen as pagan, and in the 3rd century CE, with the spread of Christianity, the Egyptians adopted the modified version of the Greek alphabet known as Coptic. Coptic survives to this day and is still used by some Christian denominations. When Arabic replaced Egyptian as the main language of the region, ancient Egyptian language survived through Coptic, making it one of the crucial pieces in the decipherment of the hieroglyphs. The first cataract marked the southern border of early dynastic Egypt. Just downstream from the cataract lies Elephantine Island. The island was fortified early in the First Dynasty, serving as a customs point for northbound trade caravans. From this position, the pharaohs could easily oversee the goods entering Egypt. This lucrative exotic goods trade was controlled by the Nubians. The insatiable appetites of the Egyptian ruling class made the Nubians exceedingly wealthy, and the pharaohs feared the rise of a rival power. Quick military intervention put a firm stop to these concerns. King Ger, the third pharaoh of the First Dynasty, led a large military campaign to the south. He conquered the entire Lower Nubia, the region between the First and Second Cataracts. The Nubian Group A culture, which had been flourishing in the region, completely disappeared from Lower Nubia. No indigenous population would inhabit the region again until the late Old Kingdom period, some 1,000 years later. Having secured the southern border, the Egyptians started expanding towards the Near East. In the early First Dynasty, the Egyptians conquered the Sinai Peninsula, opening large turquoise and copper mines in the region. Soon they moved even further east towards Canaan. They founded Ain Besor near Gaza. This settlement served as a permanent trading hub, maintaining contact with the Levant and the wider Near East. With the increase in sea trade across the Mediterranean, Ain Besor would decrease in importance and eventually fall into ruin. The death of the pharaoh Ka around 2910 marks the end of the First Egyptian dynasty. Although he had a long and prosperous reign, a power struggle between royal houses erupted following his death. The traces of the first grave robberies in Abydos date to this period. Ultimately, Hotep Sekemwi emerged victorious and crowned himself the first pharaoh of the Second Dynasty. He chose to abandon hundreds of years of tradition and constructed a new royal burial ground near Memphis. The rule of the Second Dynasty is marked by increased unrest and the decline of central authority. Rebels in Lower Egypt gained independence, pushing away the power of the pharaohs. King Peripsen abandoned the royal seat in Memphis, moving his palace and his burial chambers back to Abydos. Peripsen is entirely unique among Egyptian pharaohs. The pharaohs could write their name in a decorative frame called a cartouche. It was meant to protect the pharaoh from evil spirits in both life and death. The cartouche would later play a key role in deciphering the hieroglyphs. It evolved from the boxy serech, which dates back as far as 3400 BC. A falcon representing the god Horus was often perched atop the serech. However, Peripsen's name is written with the Set animal and not the falcon on top. This shows that he chose Set and not Horus as his patron deity. He was the only pharaoh in Egyptian history to do so. With Egypt on the verge of falling into the chaos of an intermediate period so soon after unification, a powerful figure arose in the south. Around 2690, Chasechem ascended to the throne of Upper Egypt. His very name means the power has appeared. Chasechem waged a fierce campaign in the north, subduing the rebels of Lower Egypt and once again uniting the two lands. To commemorate his victory, he adopted the name Chasechemwi. The two powers have appeared. His name was adorned with both the falcon wearing the double crown and the Set animal, symbolizing the union of these two gods within him. Egypt prospered under Chasechemwi's rule. He expanded Mediterranean trade routes towards Byblos, importing cedar trees, important for the construction of large seafaring ships, and tin, a rare metal crucial for the production of bronze. With the increase in state revenue and access to superior bronze tools, Chasechemwi initiated the construction of countless monuments across both Upper and Lower Egypt. He built a vast temple complex in Hierakonpolis, a massive royal tomb in Abydos, and a massive structure known as the Great Enclosure in Saqqara. He was by far the most prolific builder of early Egyptian history, and his prosperous reign would set the stage for the construction of the Great Pyramids. Hasekemwi's death marks the end of the early dynastic period. He was succeeded by Zoser, the first pharaoh of the Third Dynasty and the first ruler of the Old Kingdom. As soon as Zoser ascended to the throne, he began construction of his burial palace. The credit for the construction of his masterpiece goes to his Grand Vizier and chief architect, Imhotep. The king chose a site in Saqqara near the Grand Enclosure. Previous royal tombs had been built from mud brick, but Imhotep decided to construct his magnum opus out of stone, creating the world's first massive stone structure. The Egyptians reused the readily available stones from the Grand Enclosure to speed up the construction. They built a massive mastaba tomb above the king's burial chamber. The monument dwarfed everything previously built in Egypt, but Imhotep's grand design was not yet finished. Once the first layer was completed, he built another smaller mastaba on top of it. He repeated this process until he had a series of 6 layers stacked upon each other. Thus, he created the world's first stepped pyramid. Upon completion, the step pyramid of Zoser immediately became a symbol of Egypt and a symbol of the pharaoh's eternal power. The pyramid measured 121 by 109 meters with a height of 60 meters. When built, it stood as the tallest structure in the world. The pyramid was surrounded by a vast complex which would serve as the setting for Zoser's Set Festival for eternity. The Set Festival was a celebration held by pharaohs after 30 years of their reign, meant to rejuvenate the pharaoh's body and preserve his youth. Imhotep's name survived on a statue base near the entrance to the enclosure, confirming his existence. He is the first recorded Grand Vizier in Egyptian history. For his achievements, he too was deified, becoming the god of scribes and healing. His tomb served as an ancient pilgrimage site, with countless Egyptians bringing him offerings. Large tunnels filled with these offerings were found in Saqqara, but his tomb remains lost to history. The construction of Zoser's step pyramid required the coordination of the entire state. The Grand Vizier and other high officials rose in importance. These offices were reserved for the king's family members, who competed against each other for the control of the state. The lesser posts, like local overseers, were open to competent individuals who could slowly rise through the ranks. This extensive bureaucracy would form the backbone of the Old Kingdom's economy. Zoser's Great Stepped Pyramid overshadows all other pharaohs of the Third Dynasty. His successors tried to copy his grand design, but none managed to complete it within their lifetime. Their names are reduced to no more than footnotes of history. This was somewhat rectified by Huni, the last member of his dynasty. Instead of building a single grand pyramid, Huni ordered the construction of numerous smaller stepped pyramids across Egypt. Although his achievements are nowhere near as impressive as his predecessors, these smaller pyramids served as constant reminders of the pharaoh's authority throughout Egypt. 7 stepped pyramids, scattered across regional centers, were built in total. Huni was succeeded by Snefru, the first pharaoh of the Fourth Dynasty and perhaps the most prolific builder in Egyptian history. Wasting no time, Snefru immediately began construction of his funerary monument. However, he chose to break with tradition in more than one way. Snefru chose a location away from Saqqara, in Mieroop, for his grand monument. The Mieroop pyramid was initially built as a step pyramid consisting of 8 large layers. It was previously believed that Huni constructed this pyramid, but an ancient graffiti dating to the 18th Dynasty attributes the pyramid to Snefru, and today most Egyptologists agree with this assertion. As the construction of the step pyramid was drawing to a close, Snefru's ambitions grew even further. Dissatisfied with the pyramid's design, he chose to start construction on the first true geometric pyramid. His second attempt was built in Dahshur. The pyramid had an ambitious design, with sides inclined at a 60 degrees angle and a height of nearly 150 meters. However, it was built on sandy foundations, and as the structure grew taller, the land beneath began to shift. Recognizing the danger of collapse, the builders reinforced the lower layers with new stone blocks, reducing the angle of the pyramid to 54 degrees. With this enormous weight pressing down, cracks started appearing within the burial chamber. 40 ships carrying massive cedar trees from the Levant were brought to the pyramid. These trees were used to create large columns to support the weight of the ceiling. However, these Herculean efforts were insufficient to save the project, and the angle of the upper half of the pyramid had to be further reduced to 43 degrees. This gave the pyramid an unusual appearance and its name, the Bent Pyramid. This is no appropriate resting spot for the god king Snefru, and even before it was completed, work began on his third and final monument. Having reigned for 20 years already, Snefru was at the risk of dying before his final resting place could be finished. The work also began on the Mieroop Pyramid, with workers using large limestone blocks to transform the step pyramid into a true geometric pyramid. With ongoing work on 3 massive construction sites, this period is likely the most productive building period in Egyptian history. The Mieroop Pyramid was not designed with this conversion in mind, and eventually its sides collapsed into a massive heap of rubble at its base. The work had to be abandoned, and all efforts were focused on the Red Pyramid in Dahshur. Using all the knowledge gained from the 2 failed attempts, the Red Pyramid was constructed in as little as 10.5 years. It was built on solid bedrock, with a 43-degree angle, the same as the top half of the Bent Pyramid. It reaches a height of 105 meters. The Red Pyramid was completed around 2590 BC. Snefru successfully finished his greatest project before his death, leaving Egypt with one of its most striking monuments. Originally, the pyramid was lined with white limestone blocks, but during the Middle Ages, they were repurposed for the construction of Cairo, exposing the reddish limestone blocks that had been hidden beneath. This reddish hue gave the pyramid its name. Snefru had to mobilize the entire state for the construction of his 3 great monuments. Large trade expeditions were sent to the Levant to procure the much-needed timber. Snefru led large military campaigns to Sinai, conquering local tribes and expanding the pharaoh's authority. He opened new turquoise mines in the region, flooding Egypt with valuable turquoise jewelry. He established new regional centers in the south to replace the old seats of power. Dendera displaced Abydos, Thebes grew at the expense of Nakada, and Edfu replaced Hierakonpolis. In times of state turmoil, these old regional centers could rise to rival the central authority. Snefru's new cities, bearing the marks of the pharaoh, could more easily project power and maintain control of the region. Snefru also set the standards for art that would be followed for thousands of years after his death. The finely painted statues of his son Rahotep with his wife would be copied by countless generations of Egyptian artists. After Snefru's long and prosperous reign, the Old Kingdom was nearing the height of its power. He was laid to rest inside the Red Pyramid, and his son Khufu succeeded him on the throne. Khufu wasted no time and immediately began construction of his grand monument. He chose a large plateau at Giza for his final resting place. The Great Pyramid of Giza would stand above all past and future building projects in ancient Egypt. It is listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it's the only wonder still standing today. The Great Pyramid would remain the tallest structure in the world for almost 4,000 years. For more than 2 decades, tens of thousands of workers labored around the clock to haul more than 2.5 million massive stone blocks to a height of 146 meters. Contrary to popular belief, the pyramids were not built by slave labor, but by a mix of professional craftsmen and regular citizens. This massive workforce had to be supported by thousands of tool makers, bakers, brewers, administrators, and other professionals. During the inundation of the Nile, when the fields were covered with water and no farming could be done, Khufu could mobilize large masses of free farmers to toil on his monument. This forced labor was seen as a form of taxation of the peasants. The Giza Plateau is surrounded by large quarries that provided most of the stone blocks necessary for the construction of the pyramids. However, the white limestone used for casing the pyramid had to be transported across the Nile from the Tura quarry. Massive granite blocks used above the king's burial chamber were brought from as far away as Aswan. A massive wooden ship was buried near the pyramid. The desert sands protected the wood, and historians managed to reconstruct it. It remains in good condition even today. This ship was likely used for the pharaoh's final journey across the Nile. Remarkably little is known about Khufu aside from his burial monument. The pyramids were not inscribed with hieroglyphs, and most of the papyrus records have long since disintegrated. Some scholars, including the Greek historian Herodotus, believe Khufu was a tyrannical ruler who forcibly conscripted large masses of farmers to work on the pyramid. The official records make no mention of the pyramid's death toll, but a large number of human skeletons showing marks of fractures and other injuries have been discovered. Other historians believe that the Egyptians regarded this back-breaking work as a necessary duty in honor of their ruler. In one of the great ironies of history, the only certain image of Khufu that survived from his own time is a tiny ivory carving found among the ruins of Abydos. Khufu was succeeded by his son Djedefre. Djedefre lacked the ambitions of his predecessors, and he built only a small pyramid far away from Giza. He is notable for being the first pharaoh to incorporate the god Ra into his name and introducing the royal title Son of Ra that will be used by all future pharaohs. Under his patronage, the cult of Ra rose to prominence, and Ra replaced Horus as the chief deity in ancient Egypt. Djedefre was succeeded by his younger brother Khafre, who returned to Giza and to the Great Pyramid building. Out of respect for his father, Khafre built his pyramid slightly smaller. However, he built it on elevated ground, making it appear slightly larger than Khufu's Great Pyramid. Today, the Pyramid of Khafre can be recognized by the remaining limestone casing near the top. While excavating the causeway to his pyramid, the builders stumbled upon a massive boulder. Instead of moving it, they carved it into a sphinx, a mythical animal with the body of a lion and the head of Khafre. The pyramid was surrounded by 23 marvelous, life-size statues of Khafre. The construction of these great pyramids was taking a toll on the resources of the state, and the Old Kingdom started showing signs of decline. Khafre's successor, Menkaure, built the final pyramid in Giza. However, it was constructed on a much smaller scale. To compensate for the reduced size, Menkaure used more valuable red granite to encase the pyramid. This gave it a striking red color and a commanding appearance. In some areas, the granite remains unfinished even today, indicating that the pharaoh died before he could finish his monument. Within just 4 short generations of the Great Pyramid builders, every major pyramid of ancient Egypt had been built. The human effort and resources involved were immense, and the royal funerary monuments would never again reach such heights. For thousands of years, countless generations of Egyptians would gaze upon the Great Pyramids and lament the passage of time and the decline of their empire. The times of Snefru, Khufu, and Khafre were regarded as the glory days of old. In times of greatest crisis, during the intermediate periods, Egyptians would call for the return of these great champions who could save them from ruin and restore them to past glory. Some later pharaohs would try to copy the pyramid builders, but their attempts would fail, or simply lacked the grand ambitions of Snefru and his immediate successors. Menkaure's successor, Shepseskaf, the last pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, completely abandoned the construction of the pyramids, instead choosing to build a mastaba tomb for himself. He was succeeded by Userkaf, the founder of the 5th dynasty. With the new dynasty came another big departure from tradition. Userkaf built a small pyramid near Zoser's original step pyramid, but it was on a much smaller scale. Instead of investing resources in his tomb, Userkaf constructed a massive sun temple called Nakhen Ra. Lacking resources to project power on a monumental scale, the pharaohs had to find alternative ways to maintain control. The sun temple was meant to connect the pharaoh to the sun god and allow him to follow Ra on his daily journey from east to west. This shift in attitude likely shows the growing power of the priests of Ra, who might have become the true authority in Egypt. The higher offices of the state, previously reserved for royal family members, were now opened up to everyone. This created a new class of bureaucrats who competed based on merit. Job specialization increased, and the Egyptian bureaucracy expanded significantly. A series of non-royal tombs sprang up across Saqqara, giving us greater insight into the lives of ordinary people. These tombs are the defining monuments of the late Old Kingdom period. The number of bureaucrats continued rising rapidly throughout the 5th dynasty, placing a strain on Egypt's economy and threatening the pharaoh's authority. By the late 5th dynasty, in efforts to curb the growing power of the officials, the state implemented a major reorganization of the bureaucracy. They drastically reduced the number of bureaucrats and transferred more power to nomarchs. Hoping to limit the influence of powerful men at court, the state weakened the central authority of the pharaoh. Userkaf's successors followed in his footsteps, building new sun temples and smaller pyramid tombs. What these pyramids lacked in size, they made up for in lavish decorations. Countless scenes of gods and kings were carved into their walls. These decorations reached their height with Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. He extensively decorated his burial chamber and, more importantly, meticulously carved numerous hieroglyphs on the inner walls of his monument. These hieroglyphs, known as the pyramid texts, contain prayers and magical spells intended to safeguard Unas in the afterlife. He was the first pharaoh to inscribe the walls on his funerary monument, but he would not be the last. Unas died without having a son who could inherit the kingdom. His throne was seized by a commoner named Teti, who married the king's daughter to provide him legitimacy. And so began the 6th dynasty of ancient Egypt in times of uncertainty and court intrigue. Teti surrounded himself with extremely loyal courtiers, but this would not save him. He was likely assassinated by the late king's family members. He was succeeded by his son and chosen heir, Pepi I. He would reign for 40 years, and much of the information on this period comes from the tomb of one of his most trusted advisors, Veni. Veni rose from a lowly position of a storehouse custodian to one of Pepi's closest advisors. Veni reportedly discovered a harem conspiracy, a plot by one of the king's minor wives to kill his chosen heir and put her son on the throne. Being close to the king and having access to his harem, Veni uncovered the plot and brought the culprits to justice. Other inscriptions in his tomb reveal that Egypt's decline was clear even to outsiders. The Bedouin tribes in the north, who had long feared the pharaohs, now saw an opportunity to strike. The fertile lands around the Nile were always a tempting target. According to his inscriptions, Veni waged campaigns in the north to push back the sand dwellers on 5 separate occasions. As Egypt's power was waning, the Nubians in the south began rising again. A confederation of Nubian chieftains emerged in Lower Nubia, challenging the pharaoh's authority. It was now only a matter of time before the central authority failed. During these turbulent times, Pepi II, a boy of 6, ascended to the throne. According to some accounts, Pepi II would go on to reign for more than 90 years, making him the longest ruling monarch in not only Egyptian but world history. These accounts are sometimes questioned, but records indicate that his reign lasted at least 65 years, still a remarkably long period for that time. His reign is marred by the continued decline of the Old Kingdom. Nubians in the south gained independence, the Bedouins continued their incursions towards the Nile, and nomarchs kept wresting power away from the central authority. Powerful regional overseers started dynasties of their own, and positions that were once granted by the pharaoh to his loyal subordinates were now hereditary. A series of low Nile inundations is recorded during his reign, causing widespread famines. Royal storehouses, which could once step in to relieve the suffering, were long abandoned. Some historians have connected these droughts to the 4.2 kilo-year event, one of the most severe climate change events of the Holocene epoch, which caused severe droughts across Afro-Eurasia. This globe-spanning event is sometimes blamed for the fall of the Lingzhou culture in China, the Indus Valley civilization in India, the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, and the Old Kingdom in Egypt. This connection, however, cannot be definitively established with current archaeological evidence. A long reign is usually associated with the stability and prosperity of the state, but Pepi II outlived most of his sons and chosen heirs. As he approached the end of his long life, a political crisis was brewing in his court, with his numerous successors vying for control of the crumbling kingdom. When Pepi II died, around 2200 BC, the Old Kingdom died with him. What followed was almost 200 years of uncertainty known as the First Intermediate Period. Complete collapse of the state and the ruling authority is often accompanied by the collapse of the economic system. However, the archaeological record shows a different picture. While the royal court was almost entirely diminished, the average Egyptian enjoyed a higher level of prosperity. Archaeologists have found evidence of intricate, non-functional objects. They have also discovered important luxury goods and rare metals, indicating that trade with the Levant continued into the Intermediate Period. Pepi II was succeeded by a series of weak and poorly documented kings, bringing the 6th dynasty to an end. According to Manetho, the 7th dynasty consisted of 70 kings ruling for 70 days. Although most likely invented, it clearly demonstrates the instability of the Intermediate Period. In reality, 20 years following Pepi's death saw as many as 17 different rulers on the throne, with only one managing to hold the position for more than a year. These rulers, collectively known as the 8th Dynasty, ruled from Memphis over a likely divided Egypt. The nomarchs finally wrestled power away from the central authority, recognizing the kings in name only. Some of them would rise to control several provinces, creating a localized base of power. The most powerful of these nomarchs were based in Heracleopolis, a city near the entrance to the Fayoum oasis. They eventually overthrew the pharaohs in Memphis, and Kheti crowned himself king of Egypt, establishing the 9th dynasty. Although he styled himself like the great pharaohs of old, his domain was likely limited to the region between Memphis and Asyut, known as Middle Egypt. Other nomarchs gained prominence in Upper Egypt, with their funerary inscriptions making only cursory mentions of the supposed kings in the north. The most notable provincial overseer during the early kings of Heracleopolis was Ankhtifi. Starting his career as the nomarch of Hierakonpolis, he soon conquered Edfu and forced Aswan into a military alliance. He would go on to wage wars against Thebes, but with limited success. Inscriptions in his tomb, and in tombs of other nomarchs of that period, tell of great famines ravaging Egypt while they successfully feed their people. It's unclear if these famines were real or more likely just a literary invention used to bolster the prestige of the tomb's owner. Soon after his death, Intef the Great took control of Thebes. He held the title of nomarch and overseer of the priests, uniting political and religious authority. He conquered the southern provinces previously controlled by Ankhtifi, greatly increasing Theban power. Intef proclaimed himself the great overlord of Upper Egypt, and Dendera joined his cause. With this, he had at least 5 nomes under his control. Intef the Great is considered the founder of the future 11th dynasty. As such, he was honored by several later pharaohs, some of who came along after the death of his dynasty. Recognizing a rival power was rising in the south, the kings of Heracleopolis installed the loyal governor in Koptos, situated between Thebes and Dendera. Koptos was an important town guarding the access to the desert trade routes. If it were to fall, the Thebans would have easy access to the holy city of Abydos and the Heracleopolitan heartland. Hostilities soon broke out between the southern nomarchs. One of Intef's successors, the confusingly named Intef I, conquered the desert routes, cutting off Koptos from Heracleopolis. Surrounded, Koptos soon fell, and Intef I united the southern nomes under his rule. He took the title Son of Ra and crowned himself dual king of Egypt. His intentions were plain for everyone to see. The path was now open to Abydos, the administrative center of Upper Egypt, and an all-out war broke out between Thebes and Heracleopolis. Successor to the throne, Intef II was a competent military leader, inspiring fanatical devotion in his generals. He conquered Abydos in the north and expanded into parts of Lower Nubia in the south. For the first time in over a century, the Egyptians controlled lands beyond the First Cataract. His conquests greatly enriched Thebes. During his nearly 50 years on the throne, Intef II was remembered as a just and capable ruler, leaving Thebes in a dominant position. Following a brief reign of his son Intef III, who consolidated power, the throne passed to Mentuhotep II. He was a young and energetic ruler, inheriting his grandfather's keen military skill. His early reign passed in peace, but the leaders of Heracleopolis were determined not to surrender without a fight. In the 14th year of Mentuhotep's reign, they organized a massive counterattack, taking back Abydos. However, during this attack, the royal tombs were desecrated. This act of sacrilege would not go unpunished, and the gods turned their backs on Heracleopolis. Mentuhotep led a massive host from Thebes. He crushed the enemy force in Abydos, but did not stop there. He pushed on to Asyut, conquering the city and deposing the local nomarch. The other nomarchs, seeing the writing on the wall, soon joined his cause. Mentuhotep continued his march all the way to Heracleopolis. The city was easily captured, and the survivors fled into the western desert. Although Mentuhotep II was now the sole ruler claiming kingship of Egypt, the land remained divided. It would take him another 25 years to finally subjugate rebellious Lower Egypt. In the 39th year of his reign, Mentuhotep II took the title Uniter of the Two Lands, finally marking the end of the First Intermediate Period and the start of a new age of prosperity, known as the Middle Kingdom. Having secured his kingdom and his place in eternity, Mentuhotep implemented a series of sweeping reforms. Some of the power once given to the nomarchs in the late Old Kingdom was taken back, strengthening the central authority. Thebes was made the new capital of the unified kingdom, and influential Theban families loyal to the king were installed in positions of power. Mentuhotep re-established control over Sinai, reopening the old turquoise and copper mines. He also established dominion over the desert oasis, further expanding Egyptian influence. After a long line of kings with no adequate burial monument, Mentuhotep II would construct a massive tomb near Thebes known as Deir al-Bahari. The stones of his mortuary complex were later repurposed by the pharaohs of the 18th Dynasty. Mentuhotep's successors were weak, and the nomarchs fought to take back the autonomy they had recently enjoyed. Amidst this chaos, his grandson Mentuhotep IV was deposed by his vizier Amenemhat I. who crowned himself the first pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. The 12th dynasty is one of the most stable and longest ruling in Egyptian history. 8 monarchs ruled for a combined 190 years. Under their leadership, Egypt rose to new heights both politically and artistically. The Old Kingdom is known for its pyramids, and the New Kingdom for its grand temples. In contrast, the Middle Kingdom lacks instantly recognizable monuments. However, this should not be seen as a sign of weakness. The wealth of the Middle Kingdom is reflected in its great literary works, with most of Egypt's best-known books dating to this period. Hoping to establish a new power base, Amenemhat constructed a new capital, tjcold. Although the city is lost under countless layers of Nile sediment, we know it was located between Memphis and Heracleopolis. Positioned closer to the geographic center of Egypt than Thebes, tjcold offered a more strategic position for overseeing the unruly local officials. Amenemhat also built a series of forts on Egypt's northeastern border, securing the delta from Asian incursions. Amenemhat I never forgot his unlawful ascension to the throne, and he feared the rise of rival claimants. In an effort to secure his family's place at the top of Egyptian politics, he implemented a radical policy. He crowned his son Senusret I as co-regent, and the two ruled Egypt together for nearly 10 years. The co-regency will remain a prominent feature of the 12th dynasty. Amenemhat was perhaps right to fear insurrection. Around 1962 BC, while his son was leading a military campaign in Libya, Amenemhat was assassinated. Upon hearing the news, Senusret rushed back to Egypt. The co-regency proved successful, and Senusret, who had already reigned for 10 years, accrued enough political power to quell the insurrectionists and maintain control of the throne. He used his father's death as a propaganda tool, commissioning a great work of literature based on the assassination. Using it as a pretense for an extensive crackdown of the opposition, Senusret was seen as a devoted son rather than a tyrannical ruler. During the turmoil at the end of the 11th dynasty, the Nubians once more gained independence in the south. Several figures rose to prominence, even adopting the Egyptian royal titles. This direct challenge could not be tolerated, and once order was restored at home, Senusret turned his sights to the south. He led a large military expedition, conquering Lower Nubia and enslaving the local population. This gave them access to the rich gold mines east of the Nile. The Egyptians built a large fort on the Second Cataract to watch over the rich lands of Kush to the south. During the reign of Senusret's successor, Amenemhat II, Egypt became a major international power. In the foundations of a temple near Thebes, 4 copper chests bearing his name were uncovered. They contain one of the richest hoards ever found in Egypt, containing precious metals, lapis lazuli, fine beads, and Mycenaean silver cups. These objects suggest that the Egyptians participated in the lucrative trade networks of the Mediterranean. Amenemhat II also launched military expeditions into the Levant, bringing back large amounts of valuable goods and captured slaves. The influx of these Asian slaves would eventually alter the demographic makeup of Egypt, with unforeseen consequences. While Egypt was establishing its position on the international stage, a power struggle between the central authority and local officials persisted. Senusret III was determined to put a final stop to this tug of war. Instead of outright dismissing nomarchs and provoking them to revolt, he lured them to court with promises of great riches awaiting them. The nomarchs voluntarily abandoned their provinces and took up newly created offices at court. Now separated from their seats of power, Senusret III could finally act against them. He abolished the office of nomarch and divided Egypt into 3 large regions: Lower, Middle, and Upper. They were governed from tjcold in the north and Thebes in the south, and power was finally concentrated in the hands of the pharaoh. During his reign, the kingdom of Kush in Upper Nubia was growing in power. In an attempt to hold control of conquered lands and stop incursions from the south, Senusret led 4 successful campaigns in Nubia, expanding even further up the Nile. He built a series of large interconnected forts along the river. His expeditions would leave a lasting impact on the region. During the New Kingdom, Senusret III was deified and worshipped as a god of war. Some Greek writers place him second only to Alexander the Great. This shows that he was well remembered and his actions highly exaggerated in the first millennium. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty tried to emulate their great predecessors of the Old Kingdom by building pyramid tombs. The height of this construction and the height of the Middle Kingdom came during the reign of Senusret's successor, Amenemhat III. Returning to the roots, he built his pyramid at Dahshur. However, the pyramid was placed on weak foundations and began to crack even before it was finished. It has since collapsed, revealing the core of dark mud brick, giving it the name Black Pyramid. Unperturbed, Amenemhat started construction of his second pyramid in Fayum. It was made from mud brick and encased with white limestone from Tura, giving it the appearance of great pyramids of old. Today, it is no more than a crumbling mound. During his reign, friendly relations were established with Palestine, and a large number of Asiatics came into Egypt, settling around the Nile Delta. These Semitic-speaking peoples were experienced desert travelers. They were employed for the king's paramilitary police force to patrol the western desert. This substantial Asiatic community would soon leave a lasting mark on the history of ancient Egypt. Amenemhat III had no male heir who could inherit the throne. He crowned his aged relative Amenemhat IV as co-regent, but he too would die without an heir. The throne then passed to Amenemhat III's daughter, Sobek-Nefru, the first confirmed queen of Egypt. She tried to assert legitimacy through connection to her father, but she ruled for only 4 short years. With her death, one of the longest ruling dynasties in Egyptian history came to an end. During the First Intermediate Period and the early Middle Kingdom, Egyptian religious beliefs underwent a significant shift. Osiris, once a regional god from Upper Egypt, rose to national prominence. He was merged with the god of the underworld from Abydos, and his cult became one of the most important religious institutions in Egypt. Funerary practices across the Nile Valley evolved to reflect this change. The pyramid texts, previously reserved solely for the royals, were now inscribed on the coffins of wealthy commoners and nobles alike. Abydos became a pilgrimage site, with countless Egyptians coming to pay respects and secure their place in the afterlife. After the death of Sobek-Nefru, the 13th dynasty took control of Egypt. This dynasty is somewhat mysterious, with many rulers reigning for a short period of time. A familial connection between most of the rulers cannot be made. This led some Egyptologists to suggest that these men were heads of a few elite ruling families who shared power amongst themselves. Most of these men were already old when they ascended to the throne, meaning they ruled for only a brief period before being replaced by another elderly king. They continued governing from tjcold and maintained systems set up by their predecessors. Although the very top of the political hierarchy was in a state of constant flux, the rest of the Egyptian bureaucracy maintained the stability of the state, but only briefly. With such rapid changes, the people stopped believing in the divine nature of the pharaoh. Gradually, the state was losing power, unable to maintain its farthest frontiers. Forts in the northeast were abandoned, and the Nubian garrisons were left to fend for themselves. Desperate, they turned to the enemy, continuing to maintain the forts but now in the name of Kush. The kingdom of Kush quickly exploited this weakness and conquered Lower Nubia, taking control of the rich gold mines. Back during the 12th dynasty, Amenemhat I built Avaris, a city in the eastern Nile Delta. With its large harbor, Avaris served as an important trading hub. Initially a purely Egyptian settlement, it soon attracted a significant Asiatic population. The two cultures blended, with the newcomers adopting some Egyptian practices while retaining a good deal of their own customs. Following the decline of border patrols in the northeast, immigration of Semitic-speaking people accelerated. Avaris continued growing steadily, soon becoming one of the largest settlements in the Near East. With the decline of central authority, the leader of the Asiatics in the region crowned himself king of Lower Egypt and established a rival 14th dynasty. Numerous kings were assigned to this dynasty, but they are poorly documented and not well understood. Too weak to respond to this challenge, the pharaohs of the 13th dynasty had no choice but to abandon tjcold around 1700 and move their capital back to Thebes. The second intermediate period had begun, and it would be worse for the average Egyptian than the first. During this time, the population was highly militarized, especially in the north. Regular grave goods were replaced with numerous bronze weapons. A devastating plague, accompanied by famines, ravaged Avaris, with evidence showing countless haphazard burials in the city. Historians believe that the same disease afflicted Upper Egypt, explaining the further decline of the 13th dynasty. In the midst of these natural disasters, around 1650, a new enemy appeared on the horizon. Riding their newly developed horse-drawn chariots, the Hyksos, originating in Phoenicia, crossed the Sinai Peninsula and swept across Lower Egypt. They conquered the whole Nile Delta, including the ancient capital, Memphis. The name Hyksos comes from a Greek rendering of the Egyptian word Hekau Chasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. It was a term widely used by the Egyptians to denote Asiatic, Nubian, and other foreign kings. The kings from Avaris, the new 15th dynasty, would write Hekau Hasut after their name, giving us the term Hyksos. The picture of the Hyksos arriving in Egypt from Asia comes from Manetho. However, recent scholarship questions these claims. Large-scale invasion from the north is not attested to in the archaeological record. It is possible that the 15th dynasty arose from a powerful Asiatic family already present in Egypt. What we can say for certain is the Hyksos were Semitic-speaking people with Syro-Palestinian roots. According to our ancient sources, the 6 Hyksos kings ruled for 108 years. At their greatest extent, the Hyksos ruled over Lower Egypt, large parts of Middle Egypt up to Kusai, and southern Canaan. They enjoyed a period of prosperity with clear evidence of bustling trade with the Near East and Crete. Several surviving pieces of painted frescoes point to Minoan artists working in Egypt during this period. They also took control of the desert trade routes, establishing contact with the kingdom of Kush. The remnants of the Middle Kingdom were pushed back into Upper Egypt. The new 17th dynasty rose to power in Thebes during the Hyksos invasion. They controlled the area between Aswan in the south and Kusai in the north. These kings are poorly documented. It's likely that various different families rose to power during some 100 years of their reign. During this time, the Thebans successfully repelled a large invasion force from Nubia, stopping it at a town near Hierakonpolis. It's possible they had more amicable relations with the Hyksos kings, but this cannot be definitively stated. The first well-attested king of the 17th dynasty is Sekenenre Tao, who ruled around 1550 BC. It appears he abandoned the peaceful policy with the Hyksos and led the campaign to the north. He was killed with several axe blows to the head. His body was hastily mummified, suggesting he was far away from the expert priests. His mummy still shows the fatal wounds above the eyes. He was succeeded by his son Kamose. Eager to avenge his father, Kamose gathered a massive host in Thebes. However, before marching north, he had to secure his southern border. He led a swift military campaign, easily reconquering Lower Nubia. The old Egyptian forts on the Second Cataract, still manned by descendants of the Egyptian garrison, eagerly welcomed the return of Egyptian rule, and most surrendered without a fight. Having made all the necessary preparations, he marched out of Thebes and went on a rampage across Middle Egypt. Towns that stood in his way were razed to the ground, sending a clear message that every Egyptian traitor would be swiftly dealt with. The Hyksos king attempted to send a messenger to Nubia to form a military alliance against Thebes, but the Thebans took control of the desert routes and he was captured. Seeing this glorious host marching towards the Hyksos capital, the Egyptians conjured images of the great kings of old. The Egyptian revival was finally upon them and they would not oppose it. Many communities switched to his side and he marched all the way to the gates of Avaris unopposed. After a protracted siege, they were forced to retreat, leaving the capital and parts of the delta in the hands of the Asiatics. Before he could finish the reconquest of Egypt, Kamose died, leaving the throne to his young brother. Ahmose was only 10 when he ascended to the throne of Thebes. Upper Egypt, lacking a military commander, had to wait out his regency, leading to an awkward stalemate with Avaris. During this time, Thebes consolidated power and prepared the military for a new expedition. When he finally came of age, Ahmose embarked on his long-awaited campaign to the north. One by one, the Hyksos cities fell under his might until he finally reached Avaris. There is no evidence of widespread destruction of the city, suggesting that the last Hyksos king peacefully surrendered. Having thus conquered all the lands between the Mediterranean in the north and the Second Cataract in the south, the unification of Egypt was complete. Ahmose I is regarded as the founder of the illustrious 18th dynasty, and his conquests around 1550 BC marked the beginning of a new era of Egyptian prosperity, the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom arose in a world unfamiliar to the Egyptians. Previously content with looking inward on the Nile Valley, the Egyptians were now thrust onto the international stage. The rise of the New Kingdom coincided with the growth of other great empires. The Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Mitanni in Syria, and the Assyrians and Babylonians in Mesopotamia. These powerful players would be locked in a continual struggle for the Near East. The horse-drawn chariot, introduced to Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, became the primary weapon of these formidable Bronze Age empires. With the wealth of written sources from both Egypt and outside, we can construct a far clearer picture of the New Kingdom than we could for the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Ahmose I tore down the citadel in Avaris and transformed the city into a military base. Its position on the eastern edge of the delta made it a perfect starting point for military operations in Asia. Putting it to great use immediately, Ahmose launched an expedition into the Levant, extending Egyptian territory to southern Canaan. Having secured the northern frontier, Ahmose turned his gaze to Nubia. From his base at the Second Cataract, he launched raids into the kingdom of Kush as far as the Third Cataract. These raids weakened the kingdom, but no new territory was annexed. Under his influence, Amun, the patron deity of Thebes, rose to national prominence. He soon became one of the most significant gods of the Egyptian pantheon, eventually merging with the sun god Ra, thus creating Amun-Ra. Amun-Ra would be worshipped as the supreme deity of ancient Egypt for the rest of its history. Ahmose started building projects across the country. Instead of pouring most of his resources into a tomb, he repaired and revived numerous great temples damaged during the Intermediate Period. Among his projects was the last mortuary pyramid ever built in Egypt. Nowhere near in size to the Great Pyramids of old, it now lies in ruins. The pyramid was associated with the god Ra, but now that Amun took his place on the pinnacle of the Egyptian pantheon, the pyramids fell out of favor with the Egyptian pharaohs. Ahmose was succeeded by his son, Amenhotep I, who was only around 14 at the time. His reign is mostly obscure, but we can assume that he continued his father's rebuilding efforts. He established a settlement, Deir el-Medina, that housed skilled craftsmen who worked on royal tombs throughout the New Kingdom. The large number of discovered inscriptions make this village one of the most important archaeological sites of the New Kingdom. Following his death, he was worshipped as a patron deity of that settlement. Amenhotep's grandfather, Sekenenre, married his sister, with whom he had numerous children, including Ahmose and Ahmose Nefertari. The two of them married each other and had Amenhotep and Ahmose married Amun, who in turn married each other. This excessive level of inbreeding, including 3 brother-sister pairs, was almost guaranteed to lead to genetic abnormalities. It is no wonder then that Amenhotep I died fairly young without producing an heir. In this power vacuum, a commoner, Thutmose I, seized the throne. He was likely a high-ranking military official and advisor to the king. Thutmose I established a royal family that ruled for around 170 years. In their longevity, they were second only to the 12th dynasty, but in their glory they were second to none. Some of the best-known names of Egyptian history come from his family. Thutmose I wasted no time asserting his dominance. In the second year of his reign, he led a massive campaign into Upper Nubia. He crossed the Third Cataract, entering the Kush heartland. He captured the capital Kerma and razed it to the ground. The kingdom of Kush was destroyed, and Thutmose marched beyond the Fourth Cataract, leaving an inscription asserting his dominion of the land. The area between the First and the Third Cataracts was incorporated into the core of Egyptian territory. A new office, King's Son of Kush, was created to oversee the region. This high official directly answered to the king. The area between the Third and the Fourth Cataracts was left in the hands of Nubian princes who pledged loyalty to the pharaoh. Having subdued the Nubian threat, Thutmose launched a large campaign into Asia. He reportedly crossed the Euphrates, clashing with the Mitanni forces. He left an inscription north of the river and went on an elephant hunt to celebrate his victory. This was not an expansionist campaign, but rather a large-scale raid. Egyptian control of the region was confined to southern Canaan. Although a great military leader, Thutmose I was also a builder. He constructed the Grand Temple of Karnak in Thebes. The temple, dedicated to Amun-Ra, was one of the most important holy sites of the New Kingdom. Many of his successors continued expanding and adding to the site, making it the greatest temple in ancient Egypt. Thutmose I was the first Egyptian pharaoh to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. For the next 500 years, most pharaohs of the New Kingdom were buried in rock-cut tombs within the valley. Hoping to prevent tomb robberies, their burial chambers were hidden in the mountains, while their mortuary temples were built in a separate location far away from the tombs. Thutmose I was succeeded by his son Thutmose II, who reigned only briefly. Following his premature death, he was succeeded by his young son Thutmose III. Being too young to rule, his father's sister and wife, Hatshepsut, held the regency in the name of her stepson. Among her royal titles were King's Daughter, king's sister, great royal wife, and most importantly, God's wife. 7 years into her regency, around 1473, Hatshepsut leveraged the first title connecting her to Thutmose I and the last title connecting her to the supreme god Amun to crown herself king and co-ruler to Thutmose III. She took on the full royal titles and regalia of a pharaoh, including a throne name and a double crown, thus becoming the second confirmed female ruler of Egypt. Hatshepsut continued her father's monumental construction projects. She further expanded the Karnak temple in Thebes. One of the obelisks commissioned for the site cracked during construction, leaving a half-finished pillar still in the ground near Aswan. This obelisk provides valuable insight into the construction practices of the ancient Egyptians. Hatshepsut built numerous other temples across Egypt, most notable of which are Speos Artemidos, cut into the rock, and Chapelle Rouge, a red temple in Karnak. Although it was destroyed in antiquity for its materials, the temple was rebuilt in 1997 using many of its original stones. For her most impressive monument, Hatshepsut turned to the mortuary temple of her great predecessor, Mentuhotep II, the previously mentioned Deir al-Bahari. She constructed her grand complex right next to his, creating one of the most iconic monuments of the New Kingdom. Alongside her mortuary shrine, the temple included shrines for Amun-Ra, Anubis, Hathor, and other important deities. Hatshepsut is also known for her grand expedition to the lands of Punt. She assembled a fleet on the Red Sea and set sail for the northeast of Africa. The precise location of Punt remains unknown, but most historians suggest the region of modern Eritrea. Although Hatshepsut was not the first pharaoh to send an expedition to Punt, her voyage is the best documented and likely the largest. A large painted relief at Deir al-Bahari depicts this grand expedition. It shows Egyptians sailing to Punt and collecting gold and other precious gifts from the local queen. In the 22nd year of Thutmose III's reign, all records of Hatshepsut disappeared, and he started ruling as the sole monarch. The nature of her death remains unknown, with some scholars attributing it to a cancerogenic cream found in her tomb. Thutmose III wasted no time asserting his dominance over Egypt. Like his aunt before him, he looked up to his grandfather Thutmose I. But while Hatshepsut attempted to emulate their great predecessor through her building projects, Thutmose III chose to do so via military campaigns. In the first year of his sole rule, Thutmose III gathered a massive host and set out for a campaign to the Near East. A coalition of Syro-Palestinian princes allied with the Mitanni and took control of important routes across the Levant. Their leader, the Prince of Kadesh, took up a formidable position at Megiddo, better known as the biblical Armageddon. Thutmose immediately showed signs of military brilliance by avoiding the Asiatic blockades and marching to Megiddo unopposed. After a protracted siege, the Prince of Kadesh finally surrendered and Megiddo was captured by the Egyptians. Large swathes of territory were annexed and loyal rulers were installed in many towns across the Levant. Thutmose III would go on to lead another 16 military campaigns in the Near East over the following 2 decades, with the goal of expanding the frontiers of Egyptian control. During his reign, ancient Egypt reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from the Euphrates in the north to Upper Nubia in the south. In his 8th campaign, Thutmose III sailed from the Nile Delta to Byblos. There he built new lightweight ships and hauled them all the way to the Euphrates. The Egyptians then sailed up the river, taking the Mitanni forces by surprise. Their army was destroyed and the king fled the field. Emulating his grandfather, Thutmose III also left an inscription north of the Euphrates and went on an elephant hunt. Following his great victory, embassies from Mycenae to Babylon arrived in Thebes, bearing precious gifts in recognition of Thutmose III. Egypt was now seen as a major player on the international stage. While Thutmose was establishing Egyptian control of the Near East, trouble was brewing at home. The lands of Kush were never content with their Egyptian overlords, and the pharaohs had to put down several rebellions. The heavy-handed approach was ineffective, and Thutmose chose a different approach. Kerma, the ancient capital of Kush, was rebuilt by the Nubians. Instead of destroying it again, Thutmose founded a new city, Nubs, nearby. The inhabitants of Kerma were drawn away by the new economic opportunities, leaving the symbol of Nubian resistance abandoned. The New Kingdom pharaohs would no longer be troubled by their Nubian subjects. Some 20 years after the death of Hatshepsut, Thutmose III went on an extensive campaign to erase all references to her kingship from history. Many of her royal titles were chiseled over, and many of the statues depicting her as king were destroyed. The reasons for this purge remain debated. Some historians have suggested it was done out of spite, but others question why he would wait 20 years after her death instead of acting immediately. Newer theories suggest that the proscriptions were done when Amenhotep II was crowned co-regent. Attempts to erase Hatshepsut from history would prevent rival claimants from her side of the family from asserting their claims. Other historians claim that the very idea of a female pharaoh was antithetical to Egyptian beliefs and thus had to be erased from memory. Thutmose III died after reigning for 54 long years. Behind him, he left an incredibly stable and prosperous realm. All internal opposition was quelled, and the great empires of the Near East regarded Egypt as their equal. Some historians consider Thutmose III the greatest of all Egyptian pharaohs, and this period as the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian might. He was succeeded by a series of pharaohs who continued enjoying this hard-won golden age. The ninth pharaoh of the 18th Dynasty, Amenhotep III, took the throne around 1390. During his nearly 40-year reign, Egypt enjoyed an unprecedented age of peace and prosperity. Domestic threats were long subdued, the Levant was pacified, and friendly relationships were established with other great empires of the Near East. Amenhotep III led no campaigns in the Near East during his long reign. Instead, he focused his efforts inwards, leading to a flourishing of arts and culture. From his 10th regal year, Amenhotep III embarked on an extensive building campaign, the likes of which were not seen since the times of Snefru. There is hardly a temple from Nubia to the Nile Delta that was not improved in some way by Amenhotep III. Among his grand projects was the largest mortuary temple ever built in Egypt. Sadly, only 2 colossal statues guarding the entrance survive to this day. The other notable project was the Luxor Temple in Thebes. This temple was not dedicated to a specific deity, but was built as a symbol of rejuvenation of kingship and used for the important Opet festival. Over time, the Luxor Temple grew to rival the nearby Karnak Temple in scale. During his reign, Egypt established diplomatic ties with other great Bronze Age empires. Control over the rich gold mines in Nubia granted the Egyptians a monopoly on this coveted material. A cache of discovered letters, written in Babylonian and addressed to Amenhotep III, shows the pharaohs were the envy of the ancient world. Gold was traded for other precious materials such as copper, lapis lazuli, cobalt, lead, as well as royal wives. Amenhotep married 2 Mitanni, 2 Babylonian, and possibly other foreign princesses. Strangely, no Egyptian princess was ever sent abroad to marry a foreign king, a fact that angered his Babylonian counterpart. In all his building projects, Amenhotep III emphasized his connection to the sun god Ra. He pushed the boundaries of Egyptian kingship beyond anything seen before his time. He was no longer simply the son of Ra. Instead, Amenhotep III styled himself as the radiant solar disk, proclaiming his divinity. In doing so, Amenhotep elevated a minor deity known as Aten to national prominence. Aten was an aspect of the sun god Ra, depicted as a solar disk with life-giving rays. Amenhotep's great royal wife, Tia, played a major role in this process. She was also deified, being worshipped as the goddess Hathor, wife of the sun god Ra. When Amenhotep III died, after 38 years on the throne, he was succeeded by his son Amenhotep IV. There is much ongoing debate on the early years of his kingship. While some historians suggest that he shared the throne with his father for up to 12 years, others believe the two had no co-regency at all. The solar disk Aten is intimately connected to this debate, as it is often connected to the father, Amenhotep III. Scholars opposed to the co-regency argue that the son's radical reforms were fundamentally different from his father's beliefs, making it impossible for their reigns to overlap. From Amenhotep's ascension to the throne, his grand royal wife, Nefertiti, was by his side. Egyptian queens of the 18th Dynasty were gaining prominence from the very beginning. The shared title, God's wife, put them in a position of supreme religious authority. With Hatshepsut, the distinction between king and queen was further eroded. This trend culminated with Nefertiti, who was depicted as equal to the king from the outset of his reign. The reign of Amenhotep IV is divided into 3 distinct periods. The first, known as the Theban years, covers the first 5 years of his reign. During this time, Amenhotep continued his father's building projects and continued worshipping many important deities. However, Amun was conspicuously absent from his inscriptions, and in his place the solar disk Aten rose to the pinnacle of the Egyptian pantheon. Amenhotep IV built a massive temple complex near Karnak dedicated to Aten. Unusually, Amenhotep celebrated the Set festival in his third year. The center of these celebrations was again Aten, showing the king's increasing devotion to the solar disk. To reflect this shift, in the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV took a new name. Amenhotep, meaning Amun is pleased, was changed to Akhenaten, meaning effective spirit of Aten. In an unprecedented move, Amenhotep ordered the closure of all temples across Egypt, forcing priests to worship Aten instead. Many powerful cults, especially those of Amun, opposed this change. However, the Egyptian military, battle-hardened on the fields of the Near East, was turned inwards, and Amenhotep's intentions were carried out. Aten became the only god recognized by the state, making Atenism the world's first recorded monotheistic religion. These radical ideas were accompanied by artistic reforms. The traditional representation of the human form, established by the first Egyptian pharaohs and unchanged for countless centuries, was radically altered. His statues and carved reliefs look out of place among the rest of Egyptian art. Thebes was the home of Amun, and seeking to establish a new home for Aten, Akhenaten founded a new city. Choosing a striking area, halfway between Thebes and Memphis, he ordered the construction of Akhetaten, or the horizon of Aten. Today, the city is known as Amarna, and the late 18th Dynasty, including Amenhotep III and Akhenaten's successors, is referred to as the Amarna Period. Large inscriptions were carved into the cliffs near Amarna, giving us great insight into the founding of the city and its layout. Instead of using massive blocks like previous monumental projects, the city was built using smaller limestone blocks known as teletats. Weighing around 50 kilos, each block could be carried by a single worker. This greatly increased the speed of construction, and Amarna was completed within just 3 years. Many of these blocks were used by later pharaohs. The painted reliefs were turned inwards to hide images of Akhenaten, inadvertently preserving them to this day. During the reign of Akhenaten, a civil war broke out between the members of the Mitanni royal family. Their enemies exploited the turmoil, taking over their territory. Ashur, previously conquered by the Mitanni, rose up again, marking the beginning of the Middle Assyrian Empire. The Hittites attacked from the west and installed a puppet king, ending the Mitanni dominion over Upper Mesopotamia. With Akhenaten's disregard for the northern frontier, the Hittites expanded into the Levant, reaching as far as Byblos. The last 5 years of Akhenaten's reign are known as the turmoil. Little is known about this era. It was previously believed that a massive plague ravaged Amarna. However, recent archaeological studies have found no evidence to substantiate this claim. A man called Smenkhare was crowned co-ruler. He was the husband of the king's daughter and possibly his brother. He died shortly after, and another mysterious figure called Neferneferuaten was crowned in his place. The feminine form of the throne name suggests that this was none other than Queen Nefertiti herself. Akhenaten died after ruling for 17 years. He remains the most controversial and enigmatic of all Egyptian pharaohs. His radical reforms threw the entire Egyptian world into chaos. However, his ideas were not to last. Akhenaten was succeeded by his young son from a minor wife, Tutankhaten. Nefertiti continued ruling the land as his regent for the next 3 years until her death. Tutankhaten was no more than 10 years old when he became the sole ruler. With the young pharaoh on the throne, a high vizier, known as Ai, held the real power. Under his supervision, the cult of Aten was systematically dismantled and the old gods were reinstated to their proper place. The boy king changed his name to Tutankhamun to reflect this change. He was forced to abandon Amarna, moving his capital to the old seat of power, Memphis. Tutankhamun died when he was around 18. Analysis of his mummy shows that he was a feeble and sickly boy. He likely required a cane for walking. The reason for his death remains debated, with malaria and a leg fracture being likely culprits. He died before his burial chamber and mortuary temple could be completed, and he was buried in a small chamber within the Valley of the Kings. Tutankhamun had a short and mostly insignificant reign. He was destined to be forgotten, confined to the footnotes of history. However, a quirk of history secured him a place in eternity. When a British archaeologist, Howard Carter, discovered Tutankhamun's sealed tomb in 1922, he was catapulted to the forefront of history. His tomb is the greatest intact pharaoh's tomb ever discovered in Egypt. The riches contained within continue to inspire awe in anyone who gazes upon them. Tutankhamun's golden burial mask became the literal face of Egyptology, and it is likely the most famous artifact of ancient history. We can only dream of what magnificent riches must have been buried with the greatest of his predecessors. With Tutankhamun, the great Thutmose family that ruled Egypt for more than 170 years came to an end. The Egyptian Golden Age was at an end, and enemies were amassing at their borders. However, the Egyptians would not have to wait long for another pharaoh to rival the glory of Thutmose III. Tutankhamun was succeeded by his vizier Ay, who was already an old man at the time. He ruled for around 4 years. He in turn was succeeded by Tutankhamun's chief general, Horemheb. Horemheb went on an extensive campaign to erase the Amarna rulers from history. The city of Amarna was abandoned, and all statues and references to the Amarna rulers that he could get his hands on were destroyed. He was so successful, in fact, that the pharaohs of the succeeding 19th Dynasty believed there was no legitimate king between Amenhotep III and Horemheb. Horemheb, having no male heirs, appointed one of his military colleagues as the crown prince, a man named Paramisu. Already an old man at that point, Paramisu already had a son and a grandson, securing the royal succession line. He took the throne around 1295 BCE under the name Ramses I. His ascension marked the final break from the 18th Dynasty and the heretical king Akhenaten. The new 19th Dynasty is also known as the Ramesside Dynasty, and this period of Egyptian history is referred to as the Ramesside Empire. The old king Ramses I reigned for only 1 year before he died. He was succeeded by his son Seti I. Ramesside family came from the former Hyksos capital Avaris. The city still had a connection to the god Seth, and in a move unseen since the times of King Peripsen of the 2nd Dynasty, the royal family was associated with the god Seth, as seen from the pharaoh's very name. Wasting no time, Seti launched a military campaign in the first year of his reign. The northern frontier had been left exposed since the times of Akhenaten, and Seti fought personally to re-establish order in the Near East. In the first campaign, he subdued the Bedouin tribes in the Sinai. Having secured his homeland, he pushed forward into southern Canaan. With the former Egyptian vassals brought under his heel, he launched a campaign against the Hittites. Seti captured Kadesh, expanding Egyptian territory for the first time in more than 100 years. However, as soon as the Egyptian armies withdrew from the Levant, Kadesh removed the installed garrison and turned back to the Hittites. His main goal, however, was accomplished all the same. Egypt was once again seen as an important player on the international stage. His campaign also had some unforeseen consequences. The fragile peace in the Levant was broken, and the Hittites began amassing forces for a new campaign against their southern rival. Seti I continued Horemheb's efforts in rejuvenating temples across Egypt, commissioning great restoration projects. Akhenaten's legacy was being erased one stone at a time. Additionally, Seti I began construction of a massive mortuary temple at Abydos. The temple featured 6 shrines dedicated to the main gods of the Egyptian pantheon and an additional 7th shrine for the cult of the deceased king. The temple soon became the center of the cult of Osiris, and the pharaoh secured his place alongside the king of the dead. A large relief carved into the temple depicts Seti and the crown prince Ramses making offerings to 75 earlier kings, stretching all the way back to Menes, the first pharaoh of unified Egypt. The Hyksos kings, Queen Hatshepsut, and the Amarna rulers are all conspicuously absent from this list. This king list was an invaluable source for reconstructing early Egyptian history. Seti I died after reigning for 11 years. In that brief period, the chaos of the Amarna revolution was truly left behind, and a new age of prosperity was upon his realm. Seti, like the previous New Kingdom pharaohs, was buried in the Valley of the Kings. His tomb, known as KV-17, is the longest in the valley. In contrast to the earlier tombs, all the walls from the entrance to the burial chamber are covered in painted reliefs, making it one of the most remarkable tombs of ancient Egypt. Many rooms also have a painted ceiling with countless golden stars on a deep blue sky. Seti's son, Ramses, was crowned co-regent near the end of his reign. He took the throne around 1279 as Ramses II, but he is often called Ramses the Great. Having ruled for 67 years, Ramses the Great is considered among the greatest of Egyptian pharaohs. In his longevity, he rivals Pepi II. In his military prowess, he conjures the image of Thutmose III reborn. And in his building projects, he surpasses even the great pyramid builder Snefru and his son Khufu. His reign is regarded as the last golden age of Egyptian history, but by its end it became a source of instability. Early in his tenure, Ramses II led a large expedition to the Near East. His goal, the rebellious city of Kadesh. He gathered a massive host, numbering 16,000 infantry and 2,000 war chariots. His counterpart, Muwatalli II of the Hittites, did likewise and marched to Kadesh in secret. As Ramses approached the city, the locals reported that the Hittite army was at least a 10-day march away. Throwing caution to the wind, Ramses, leading one of his 4 divisions, marched ahead. However, the Hittite king was on the other side of Kadesh, obscured by the fortress. He sent out his 2,500 chariots to cut off Ramses from the rest of the force. The heavy Hittite chariots, designed for shock attacks, rammed into the 2nd division. Completely outmatched by the core of the Hittite army, the Egyptians scattered. The chariots now turned north towards Ramses. The king was surprised while constructing an encampment, and a desperate struggle ensued. The king, accompanied by his Aegean bodyguards, fought desperately among his men. As all hope seemed lost, Egyptian chariots appeared on the horizon. They were transported by ships along the coast and ordered to rendezvous with Ramses near Kadesh. They clashed with the Hittite charioteers, inflicting heavy damage. As the rest of the Egyptian army appeared, the two sides disengaged. Another action was fought the following morning, but neither side could make a decisive breakthrough. Reluctantly, the two kings retreated, agreeing on a ceasefire. The core of the Egyptian army was in shambles, and Kadesh remained in Hittite hands. This, however, did not stop Ramses II from claiming this campaign as a major military victory. The finest writers and poets in the country were summoned to compose works about the triumphant Egyptian legions. These texts were inscribed on numerous temples across Egypt. Marvelous artworks depicting the king's heroic deeds in the hour of greatest need were carved into at least 5 major temples along the Nile. These detailed accounts make the Battle of Kadesh one of the best documented battles of antiquity. Ramses II used this battle throughout his life to promote a strong cult of personality. In this he was quite successful. Even today, Ramses II is seen as the greatest warrior pharaoh in Egyptian history, ahead of even the great Thutmose III. But as we have seen, his greatest military achievement is at best a draw and at worst an abject failure. Years later, around 1259, Ramses signed a peace treaty with the new Hittite king. Remarkably, this treaty was discovered in both Egyptian and Hittite languages. The treaty established a lasting peace between the two nations. In the 34th year of Ramses' reign, he married a Hittite princess, further strengthening the bond between the kingdoms. This era of peace facilitated an increase in trade across the Near East, leading to a noticeable increase in prosperity from the Black Sea to the banks of the Nile. Having secured a lasting peace, Ramses could turn his attention inward. He is likely the most prolific builder in Egyptian history. He left his mark on nearly every temple from Nubia to the Delta. He dismantled most of the remaining temples built by Akhenaten, including the entire city of Amarna, using the Teletets to greatly accelerate the work of his builders. Among his most significant construction projects was the new capital, Ramses, or the home of Ramses. It was built in the delta near Avaris. Its position close to the Mediterranean highlights the importance of seaborne trade networks. Ramses was arguably one of the greatest cities of antiquity. However, centuries later, when the Nile changed its course, the city was left landlocked and eventually abandoned. The stones were repurposed for new construction projects, and only the foundations, covered by countless layers of silt, remain to this day. One of the greatest monuments built by Ramses, which has withstood the test of time, is 2 massive rock-cut temples in Nubia, known as Abu Simbel. The entrance to the great temple is guarded by 4 massive statues of Ramses II. It was dedicated to 3 main deities of the time, Amun, Ra-Horakhti, and Ptah. However, during construction, Ramses abandoned all pretense, added his image among other deities, and proclaimed himself a living god. The smaller nearby temple was dedicated to his wife Nefertari, who was associated with the goddess Hathor. The temple entrance is guarded by 2 statues of Nefertari, each accompanied by 2 statues of Ramses. With the construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s, Abu Simbel was destined to be submerged under the Nile and lost forever. However, in 1963, the Egyptian government, in cooperation with UNESCO, funded a Herculean preservation effort. Each stone in and around the temple was meticulously cut and labeled. The stones were then moved to a new, safer location and carefully reassembled. Within 5 years, the 2 temples of Abu Simbel were reopened and the rising waters of the Nile no longer posed a threat. To show his devotion to the creator god Amun, Ramses concentrated much of his building efforts in Thebes. Among the projects was a sprawling temple dedicated to Amun-Ra. This temple, known as Ramesseum, also served as his mortuary temple, the likes of which have not been seen since the times of Amenhotep III. The surviving records show that the construction lasted for upwards of 20 years. Ramses II died around 1213, having ruled for 67 years. Like his predecessors, he was buried in the Valley of the Kings. His tomb, known as KV7, was heavily damaged by flash floods. Ramses built another tomb, known as KV5, for his numerous children. With more than 120 chambers, it stands as the largest tomb in the Valley of the Kings. By the time of his death, Ramses II had at least 50 sons and 45 daughters. 12 of his eldest sons had already died before him, leaving the throne to Merneptah, who was already around 50 at the time. Merneptah inherited a stable and prosperous realm, but the Mediterranean world started showing the first signs of the upcoming upheaval. During the reign of Ramses II, nomadic peoples from Libya, west of the Nile, started encroaching on the fertile lands around the river. Ramses built a series of fortifications guarding the western delta from these attacks. The incursions came to a head in Merneptah's 5th year. A large coalition of Libyans and the mysterious sea peoples, strange warriors from across the sea, attacked from the west. Using desert oases, they circumvented the fortifications and attacked the Egyptian heartland. The great Ramesside army showed no signs of decline, and Merneptah successfully defeated the invaders. He recognized the threat from these invaders and took measures to protect his lands. A large number of Hittite soldiers were incorporated into the core of the Egyptian army. Shipments of grain were sent to Ugarit to support their northern ally, who too was dealing with similar threats from the sea. Additionally, Merneptah marched to Canaan to suppress several local rebellions. He left a victory inscription boasting about the massacre of one of the rebellious tribes, known as Israel. This is the only ancient Egyptian inscription mentioning the Israelites. Merneptah, being chosen by Ramses II himself, had a strong claim to the throne. This led to 10 years of internal peace. However, following his death, claimants from all sides of the family tree started vying for control of the empire. The throne passed to his son Seti II. However, Amenmisu, Ramses' son from a minor wife, established a power base in Nubia. From there, he expanded north, capturing Thebes. This power struggle lasted for around 3 years, but eventually Seti II emerged victorious. During his reign, a man of Syrian origin, known as Bey, became his closest advisor. Following Seti's short reign, Bey betrayed his patron and installed Amenmisu's young son Septa on the throne. He acted as the true power behind the king. However, in the 5th year of Septa's reign, the queen regent Tausret seized power and executed Bey for treason. Tausret was the widow of the previous king Seti II, and soon she took control of the kingdom. Septa died without a male heir, and Tausret crowned herself pharaoh of Egypt, thus becoming one of only a few confirmed female rulers. Following a brief reign, she too died without leaving an heir. The 19th dynasty and the royal line of Ramses the Great ended only 23 years after his death. Years of this power struggle severely weakened Egypt from within, and new enemies were amassing on their border. Another strong warrior king was needed. Like the previous 19th dynasty, the 20th also started with a military leader. An army commander, Setnakht, turned his forces inward. The professional Egyptian military acted swiftly and efficiently. Within only a few months, all opposition was quelled, and around 1186 BC, Setnakht was crowned the first pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. In his 3 short years on the throne, Setnakht consolidated his power, leaving a unified realm to his son. In these times of uncertainty, the new pharaoh looked to his great predecessor, taking the throne as Ramses III. While threats from within Egypt were subdued, those from outside were anything but. The great upheaval was finally upon the western Mediterranean. Within a generation, most of the great Bronze Age empires of the Near East would fall to ruin. This period, known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, is shrouded in mystery. We hear of widespread famines and unrest ravaging the Old World. These natural disasters were accompanied by invasions from the aforementioned sea peoples. These mysterious invaders, originating from Sicily, southern Italy, the Aegean, and other parts of the Mediterranean, abandoned their homes and sailed eastward in large numbers. While some historians have characterized them as raiders and pirates, others have suggested they were refugees fleeing the same natural disasters afflicting the great empires. Several studies point to a severe climate change event that caused droughts across the eastern Mediterranean. Having heard tales of magnificent kings and marvelous riches, the sea peoples went in search of new lands. What they found instead were the crumbling empires long past their prime. While the Mycenaeans in Greece and the Hittite Empire collapsed, the new warrior pharaoh of Egypt, Ramses III, successfully repelled a massive invasion of the sea peoples. The greatest attack came in his 8th regal year. A large coalition of sea people invaded Egypt from the north. As soon as the news of the impending invasion reached the pharaoh, he ordered a mass mobilization. First, Ramses destroyed a massive land force as they advanced through the Levant. The rest of the army, moving across the sea, was lured into the mouth of the Nile, where they were massacred by skilled Egyptian archers. While the other great empires went up in flames, the Egyptians survived, at least for now. To celebrate his victory, Ramses built a mortuary temple inspired by the Ramesseum, strengthening his connection to his great predecessor. The temple, known as Medinet Habu, was inscribed with the scenes of the two battles. Egypt's last great royal monument commemorated its last great military victory. Although Ramses was projecting power to his subjects, trouble was brewing beneath the surface. While the king was preparing for the all-important Set festival, workers in Deir el-Medina went hungry. These workers, excavating and decorating royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, were some of the most valued state employees. After not receiving pay or provision for some time, they went on the first recorded strike in history. They besieged Ramesseum, the main granary in Thebes, demanding food. Although the strike was eventually ended, unrest would continue, culminating in great acts of sacrilege. Ramses' celebrations were short-lived, however. Around 1153, after ruling for 30 years, Ramses III was a target of a harem conspiracy. One of his minor wives, Tia, hoping to place her son on the throne, tried to kill the king. The conspirators were caught, however, and 38 people, including the queen and her son, were sentenced to death. Mere months after the plot was uncovered, Ramses was dead. He was the last great Egyptian pharaoh, but in his wake he left the country on the brink of collapse, marred by both internal and external struggles. Ramses III was succeeded by several pharaohs of the same name. From Ramses IV to Ramses XI, sons and grandsons of their namesake, these kings had mostly short rules during a period of decline. Several large-scale corruption scandals destabilized the country. State workers went unpaid, leading to rising unrest and rampant tomb robberies. The Libyan nomads roamed freely across the land, harassing the population. During the reign of Ramses VI, the Egyptians lost control of their last possession in the Near East and abandoned the mines in the Sinai Peninsula, and thus ended the great Egyptian empire. The mighty state forged by a long line of great pharaohs was now no more than a shadow of its former glory. The decline of the pharaoh was accompanied and even expedited by the rise of the high priest of Amun. Since the Amarna revolution, the pharaohs had gifted lands and with them power to the primary cult of Egypt. This culminated with Ramses III, who allocated as much as 15% of the land, along with over 100,000 working-age men in a single decree. It's possible that after this, the cult of Amun controlled roughly 1/3 of all arable land in Egypt. It's no wonder then that the high priest of Amun began challenging the authority of the pharaoh. By the late 20th dynasty, the high priest Ramses Nacht had taken control of Thebes, and with it most of Upper Egypt. He recognized the pharaoh in name only. During the reign of Ramses IX, the unthinkable had happened. The workers of Deir el-Medina, fed up with the tough working conditions and lack of adequate provisions, decided to finally enrich themselves. A few daring workers organized the first recorded tomb robberies in the Valley of the Kings. The initial target was Ramses VI, but no tomb was safe. All the protections put in place to safeguard the pharaohs and their treasures were powerless against those who designed them. The men who built these royal tombs were the first to rob them. By the time of the last pharaoh of the 20th dynasty, Ramses XI, the situation around Thebes had reached a new low. The countryside was unsafe, tomb robberies increased, and even the great temples were attacked. Viceroy of Kush, a man named Panexi, marched his armies to Thebes. He clashed with the high priest of Amun, eventually taking the title and the accompanying riches for himself. The king sent his general Pi-Ankh to deal with the rebellious viceroy. The ensuing civil war devastated the Egyptian countryside, and many temples were damaged and looted in the process. Pi-Ankh prevailed and took the title of High Priest of Amun for himself. He would go on campaigns to Nubia to pursue the former viceroy and to establish his dominion over the rich region. To fund his campaigns, he ordered the robbing of even more tombs in the valley. Piang died suddenly around 1080. He was succeeded by another army general, Herihor. While his predecessor recognized the king, in name at least, Herihor crowned himself the king of Upper Egypt, formally dividing the two lands. Ramses XI died around 1069, marking the end of the Ramesside Dynasty and the final end of the New Kingdom. As the Nile's waterways around Ramses clogged up, the bureaucracy moved to a new capital, Tanis, leaving the house of Ramses abandoned. The mighty Ramses the Great was now no more than a distant memory. Egypt had fallen into the chaos of a third intermediate period, but it would not rise for the fourth time. 2,000 years after Menes united the two lands, the era of truly great Egyptian pharaohs came to an end. After the death of Ramses XI, Mendes took control of Lower Egypt, marking the start of the 21st dynasty. He was likely the son of the high priest Herihor, and the two parts of the kingdom, now divided between Thebes and Tanis, coexisted peacefully. There is no recorded hostility between the two rulers, and instead we hear of aid going both ways. The Theban priests, hoping to preserve the mummies of the pharaohs, removed them from their tombs and buried them in large royal caches. They carefully labeled the mummies before they were reburied. Upwards of 50 royal mummies, including those of Ramses II, Thutmose III, and other prominent pharaohs, have been discovered near Deir el-Bahari. The marshy lands around the delta again posed problems for archaeologists, and little evidence from this period survived. However, the most magnificent archaeological find from the Third Intermediate Period comes from Tanis. The third pharaoh of the 21st dynasty, Psusenes I, was buried within a temple complex. Unlike Tutankhamun's tomb, which was robbed twice in antiquity, Psusenes' tomb was found completely intact. He was buried within a sarcophagus made of solid silver, giving him the name Silver Pharaoh. Pure silver was unavailable in Egypt, and it was likely more valuable than gold. His golden burial mask rivals that of Tutankhamun. This shows that the pharaohs of the Third Intermediate Period still commanded considerable wealth. Along with the high priest of Amun in Thebes and the pharaohs in Tanis, another power base existed in Lower Egypt. A large Libyan population settled in the delta. Their influence was concentrated in Bubastis, with their leader known as the Great Chief of the Meshwesh. By the end of the 21st dynasty, the Libyans held significant power, and the last pharaoh, Psusenes II, named Sheshonq I his successor. This marks the start of the 22nd dynasty and the start of Libyan rule over Egypt. He appointed his son as the high priest of Amun, ensuring the loyalty of Thebes, and once more united the two lands. With this unification, Egypt was once again strong enough to wage wars in the Near East, and Sheshonq embarked on a military campaign, the likes of which had not been seen since the times of Ramses III. His conquests are well attested to in the Jewish Bible. However, his unification of Egypt was only short-lived. When he died suddenly around 922, his successors divided power amongst themselves. The central authority was waning, and local officials wrestled increasingly more power from the pharaohs. The country was more divided than ever, and several families claimed the kingship of Upper and Lower Egypt. They are known as the 23rd and 24th dynasties. During this time of instability, Nubian kings gained independence for the first time since Thutmose I. Slowly, as Upper Egypt was facing increasing unrest, the Nubians conquered Thebes, largely expanding their territory. Around 728, a Nubian king, Brier, gathered his forces and marched on Lower Egypt. He faced no united opposition, but defeated several local chieftains, one after another. His armies marched as far north as Memphis, where he accepted the surrender of Egyptian rulers. To commemorate his victory, Brier left a massive victory stele in his capital, Napata. The text inscribed on the stele is the longest royal inscription discovered in Egypt and one of the greatest works of Egyptian literature. Although Brier defeated the rulers of Lower Egypt, he didn't annex their territory. That task was left to his successor, Shabako, who around 715 defeated the last independent king in the north. The Nubians conquered the delta and moved the capital to Memphis, starting the reign of the 25th dynasty. The kings maintained a connection with their homeland, where most of them were buried. Inspired by their great predecessors of the Old Kingdom, they built pyramid tombs. These Nubian pyramids are far smaller than their Egyptian counterparts, and they are built with much steeper angles. The rule of the Nubian kings coincided with the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Although the Egyptians managed to hold back the Assyrians in southern Canaan for some time, in 671, King Esarhaddon swept through Lower Egypt and captured Memphis. Pharaoh Taharka managed to escape south, and as soon as the Assyrian forces withdrew, he recaptured the capital. Esarhaddon organized a new campaign to Egypt in 669, but he died on the way. His successor, Ashurbanipal, after consolidating power at home, marched to Egypt in 667. He pursued the pharaoh from Memphis to Thebes, looting the Egyptian countryside and ravaging the ancient capitals. Ashurbanipal left a puppet king in charge and returned to Nineveh. Taharka's successor, Tantamani, reconquered Memphis, killing the puppet king. Enraged, Ashurbanipal assembled a massive host and marched to Egypt in 663. His army was unstoppable, defeating the Nubian king near Memphis. He continued upriver, reaching the heart of Upper Egypt. During the ensuing sack of Thebes, the city was ravaged by the Assyrian forces. Many of the riches accumulated by the great pharaohs were carried off. The son of the old puppet king, Psamtik I, was installed as the new ruler of Egypt. Employing a mercenary force, Psamtik removed all opposition from the country, crowning himself the king of the two lands. After nearly 400 years, Egypt was once more united under a native Egyptian pharaoh. His ascension to the throne marks the end of the Third Intermediate Period and the start of the last era of independent Egypt, known as the Late Period. Psamtik I is among the longest reigning pharaohs in Egyptian history, having sat on the throne for 54 years. During this reign, the Egyptians established good relations with the Greeks, who even founded a colony on the Nile known as Naucratis. This city served as a major trading hub with large quantities of Egyptian grain exported to Greece and beyond. During this period, Egyptian pharaohs increasingly relied on Greek mercenaries who far surpassed the outdated Egyptian military. The first traces of iron smelting in Egypt come from Naucratis, though it is possible that ironworking was already present in the region. Psamtik I maintained a good relationship with Ashurbanipal, and as the Assyrians faced increased threats from the outside, the Egyptians sent several armies to their aid. They were unable to save them, and in 609 the Neo-Assyrian Empire fell to the forces of the rising Neo-Babylonian Empire. In the aftermath, the Egyptians asserted their dominion over the Levant by installing loyal rulers, but their imperial ambitions proved short-lived. The great Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II led several campaigns into the Levant, even entering Egyptian territory. However, he was pushed back, and the Sinai Peninsula was re-established as the Egyptian northern border. With the Babylonians preoccupied with the Jewish revolt, the Egyptians could turn southward. Pharaoh Psamtik II invaded Nubia in 592, leading a large force of Greek mercenaries. He defeated the Kushite forces but was unable to conquer the region. Following this attack, the Nubians turned away from Egypt, relocating their capital to Meroe, a city south of the Fifth Cataract. Returning to Egypt, Psamtik destroyed many of the Nubian monuments of the 25th Dynasty, hoping to erase the Kushite kings from memory. Egyptians continued struggling against the encroaching Babylonians, but soon they would face a new, far greater threat. Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, revolted against his Median overlord and in 550 won a decisive victory. He took control of the army, marking the end of the Median kingdom and the start of the Achaemenid Empire. Persian forces swiftly conquered large swathes of territory, and in 539 they captured Babylon, marking the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Under Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid Empire stretched from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean, making it the largest empire up to that point. Cyrus was succeeded by his eldest son, Cambyses II, who continued his father's expansionist policies and invaded Egypt in 525. Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik III gathered his forces in the eastern delta, but he was soundly defeated by the mighty Persian army. He withdrew to Memphis, but after a long siege, the city was taken and the pharaoh deposed. Cambyses adopted Egyptian royal titles and crowned himself the king of the two lands. He left a satrap, a Persian nobleman, serving as a provincial governor in charge of Egypt, and returned to his homeland. Egypt was allowed the degree of autonomy under Persian rule. Most of the discovered documents show that the lives of ordinary Egyptians continued without major disruptions. As part of the vast Achaemenid Empire, new trade opportunities opened and the country prospered. Persian engineers introduced several innovations, most notably a special type of underground irrigation system that further increased the available farmland. Darius the Great completed the Canal of the Pharaohs, connecting the Nile and the Red Sea. This canal created a new highway for transporting goods to the Persian heartland. Darius also reorganized the legal system by ordering scholars to collect every old Egyptian law. This massive project lasted for 10 years, and by the end they produced the Demotic and Aramaic versions of the collection. It earned Darius the title Great Lawgiver of Egypt. Even though the Persians invested heavily in Egypt, hoping to make it a core part of the empire, some Egyptians still opposed their rule. During the reign of Darius II, an Egyptian named Amirtaeus, a descendant of the pharaohs of the 26th Dynasty, organized a guerrilla campaign against the Persians. When Darius II died suddenly in 404, his sons fought for the throne, and Amirtaeus seized this opportunity to declare Egyptian independence. His reign was short-lived, however, as several different local families competed for power. After Artaxerxes II secured the Persian throne in 373, he sent a massive host, numbering over 200,000 soldiers by some accounts, to recapture Egypt. However, the Egyptians, now under Nectanebo I and aided by Greek mercenaries, successfully repelled the assault. The Egyptians maintained their independence, but constant squabbles for the throne left the country weakened. 30 years after his father's failed invasion, the new Persian king, Artaxerxes III, led a large army into Egypt, intent on finally putting a stop to this rebellion. His forces, aided by a large number of Greek mercenaries, soundly defeated the Egyptian king Nectanebo II, who is considered the last native ruler of ancient Egypt. After the defeat, he fled south, and his ultimate fate remains unknown. Artaxerxes III was the first Persian king who didn't take Egyptian royal titles. He plundered many Egyptian temples, taking considerable wealth back to Persia. Artaxerxes instituted a reign of terror and imposed harsh taxes on the country, aiming to weaken Egypt so he could never again revolt against Persian rule. He returned to his homeland, unaware that the end of his own dynasty was fast approaching. A young king from Macedon, Alexander the Great, crossed the Hellespont in 334 BCE and invaded the mighty Achaemenid Empire. He swiftly defeated the Anatolian satraps at the Battle of Granicus and continued east. He met the last Persian king, Darius III, at the Battle of Issus. Although heavily outnumbered by the Persians, the young Macedonian king led a decisive charge and broke the Persian line. King Darius fled, and his armies crumbled. Alexander continued his march, moving down the Levant. After a prolonged siege of Tyre in 332, he finally entered Egypt. He was seen as a liberator, and his armies were welcomed with open arms. Alexander was crowned in Memphis in the style of the great pharaohs of old. Looking up to his great predecessors, he declared Zeus Ammon his father. Alexander's conquest of Egypt marks the end of the late period of Egyptian history and the start of the Greco-Roman era that would last for almost 1,000 years. Alexander restored some of the Egyptian temples neglected by the Persian rulers and reformed the taxation system. He founded a new city, Alexandria, which would serve as the new seat of power. Alexander the Great left Egypt in 331, never to return. By the following year, Alexander completed his conquest of the Achaemenid Empire. He continued pushing eastward, reaching the Indus Valley. However, his troops mutinied and he was forced to turn back, never reaching the end of the world. Alexander the Great returned to Babylon in 323 to plan his next campaign. Following a day of heavy drinking, Alexander developed a high fever and died after several days of agonizing pain. He was only 32 at the time and ruling the largest empire on earth. His death marks the end of the Greek classical era and the start of the Hellenistic period. His closest generals, known as the Diadochi, divided his great empire among themselves. Ptolemy I Soter was named the satrap of Egypt under the nominal king Philip III. In 321, several generals, including Antipater, Antigonus, and Ptolemy, formed a coalition against Perdiccas, the regent of the Macedonian Empire, and the first war of the Diadochi started. While Alexander's body was on its way to Macedonia, where it would be laid to rest, Ptolemy stole it and brought it to Egypt. The following year, Perdiccas entered Egypt, hoping to recapture the body. After a failed attempt to cross the Nile, he was killed by some of his generals, and the first war of the Diadochi came to an end. One of the conspirators, Seleucus, was awarded the satrapy of Babylon, one of the wealthiest provinces in the empire. He used this wealth to quickly expand his holdings, becoming a major player in the Hellenistic world. Although the first war was over, hostilities within the empire continued, with several more wars fought in quick succession. In 306, Antigonus crowned himself king, and other Diadochi soon followed, marking the final end of the Macedonian Empire. The following year, Ptolemy I was officially crowned pharaoh of Egypt, taking the old Egyptian royal titles. Following the Battle of Ipsus and the end of the Fourth War of the Diadochi, Ptolemy enjoyed a period of peace. He turned inward, strengthening Egypt and starting a new era of prosperity. Ptolemy I founded the Ptolemaic Dynasty, which would rule Egypt until the Roman conquests some 300 years later. He was succeeded by his son Ptolemy II. During his reign, Ptolemaic Egypt reached its peak. He built the lighthouse of Alexandria, the second wonder of the ancient world located in Egypt. He also funded the expansion of the Library of Alexandria and oversaw the flourishing of Hellenistic poetry. Ptolemy II commissioned an Egyptian priest, Manetho, to write a comprehensive history of Egypt, the famous Aegyptiaca we already mentioned several times. In 275, Ptolemy II marched against a Nubian king in the south. Egyptian armies were successful, and they annexed the territory between the first and the second cataracts, gaining control of the rich gold mines. The following year, Ptolemy II led a campaign against the Seleucid king Antiochus I. Although he had some initial success, he was ultimately pushed back. This was the first of 6 separate wars fought between the two Hellenistic states for control of the Levant. The Syrian Wars, as they are called, severely weakened both states, and within 150 years they would both fall to outside threats. Exploiting this weakness, a Theban priest, Horwen-Nefer, declared independence in 205 and proclaimed himself a pharaoh of Upper Egypt. The Seleucids wanted to use this opportunity to strike a final blow to the Ptolemies, but Rome declared Egypt a protectorate and threatened war if they were to attack. With Roman aid, Egypt's north was secured, and the Ptolemies finally defeated the rebellious force in the south. Following this victory, a decree was issued by the young Ptolemy V. The inscription was written in Egyptian using both hieroglyphic and demotic scripts, but it was also written in Greek, allowing it to be read by the Egyptian pharaoh. Being inscribed on a hard granite rock, it was later used in the construction of the fort near the town of Rosetta. When the French army, under the General Napoleon, entered Egypt in 1799, they discovered this inscription. They named it the Rosetta Stone and brought it back to France. In 1822, French philologist Jean-François Champollion published the translation of the Rosetta Stone, and after more than 1,000 years, the hieroglyphs were finally deciphered and countless secrets of ancient Egypt were unlocked. The Ptolemaic dynasty continued limping along until Cleopatra VII ascended to the throne in 51 BC. She ruled as a co-regent with several male members of her dynasty. By her time, Rome exercised a great deal of authority over Egypt, but the country was not formally annexed, as the Senate could not agree on who should get this honor. In the last war of the Roman Republic, Cleopatra sided with Marc Antony against Caesar's successor Octavian. In the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian emerged victorious. Following the battle, Marc Antony and Cleopatra both committed suicide. Octavian annexed Egypt and took the title of pharaoh. He was crowned the first emperor of Rome, taking the name Augustus, and thus ended the last independent era of ancient Egypt. Under Roman rule, Egypt became a breadbasket of the Mediterranean, exporting large quantities of grain and barley to all parts of the Roman Empire. The Egyptian religion and culture continued thriving. However, with the arrival of Christianity in the 1st century CE, the pagan religion was slowly pushed back to the fringes of society. Many magnificent temples that had stood for thousands of years fell into disrepair. When Emperor Constantine the Great converted to Christianity, this decline accelerated. Finally, in 391, after Theodosius I banned the practice of pagan cults across the empire, the Egyptian religion was all but gone. On Philae, a distant island temple complex near the great Ramesside monument, Abu Simbel, far away from the watchful eyes of the emperors, a small group of priests continued worshipping the old Egyptian deities. In 394 CE, they carved the last known hieroglyphic inscription into the walls of their temple. When the temple was finally closed around 535 by Emperor Justinian I, the last people who could read the hieroglyphs died together with their religion. After more than 3,500 years, the last remnants of the great civilization of the pharaohs came to an end. We would like to thank our generous patrons. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to make these longer videos. If you want to support us and help us choose the topic for the next short history video, consider joining us on Patreon.